Well, neither one of us is wearing Raiders gear, but we are wearing black and we are in LA, so we're like 66% of the way there.
Close enough.
Close enough. Really fun episode today. Not going to lie, for all the Raiders fans watching, still not 100% sure what I actually think of this team. It's kind of a weird team to project because the high-end talent is really high-end. Like, they have some position groups on this team that are pretty scary good. And there are some things I think they could lean on to beat some, let's just say, more balanced teams in the league. Like, they have enough firepower to do that. They have enough firepower to rip some wins off some really good teams in this conference. But at the same time, are my expectations that high? Not really. I don't know. It's kind of an odd team, and I think Raiders fans feel the same way. It's not bad, but it's not great.
They've got a tightrope to walk. They have, again, lots of high-end talent in very specific spots, not so much in other very specific high-leverage spots. So their margin for victory, their envelope that they have to play in it's not razor thin, but it's not wide. We're talking about a single path on a tall mountain with a pretty steep drop off on either side.
Yeah, they got to hit every single green light if they want to make the playoffs. Not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be pretty darn hard. Overall, I would say things are moving in the right direction. Again, we're going to be realistic about some things, but also hopeful about others. We think they nailed the head coaching hire. Some of the assistants, maybe not so much, but again, overall, I think they're moving in a positive direction, and maybe this team is really more angling for 2025 than 2024. But the foundation is there. So again, stick with us for the next hour or so. We're talking all things Raiders today. Jay, Autumn, Anthony, roll it. Welcome back to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett. That's EJ. Talking Raiders today. It is Silver and Black Day here on the podcast. We have a very vocal Raiders following, I would say. They're not the largest fan base that follows us. I don't even think they're in the top 10 in terms of total number of people. But they might be the loudest, and they've been asking for this episode basically since the beginning. So if you're one of those people, today is for you. We're going to try to, again, be balanced between optimism and realism here. I would say let's start with the realism, and then we'll slowly get more optimistic as things go on.
I didn't tell you this, but my Uber driver coming from the airport when I arrived this week was a Raiders fan. Had a fresh Raiders hat on. I said, "Oh, Raiders fan? Yeah." A couple minutes later, "So how do you think they're going to do this year?"
Oh, God, here it goes.
And he was like, "I hope they do well." I was like, "Isn't that what everybody says every year?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay."
25 years and counting. I have incredible respect for Raider Nation
Yes.
because they've been through a lot of dark times, but they've never stopped showing up. Like,
Nope.
They will fill Allegiant every single week, which, I mean, Allegiant's a great stadium, so I'm not surprised by that. But even when they were in Oakland, like, they showed up every single week through the bad times and the worst times and the sometimes semi-okay times. They were there. So I truly do root for the Raiders to find some success either now or in the short future. Maybe they get Dak next year. Who knows? But because God, we just got to throw Raider Nation a bone. It's been a little bit too long since they've had any sort of hope.
They're so welcoming. I know that there's this reputation of the black hole and they're aggressive, and couldn't be further from the truth. The games we've been to at Allegiant, like, they'll let you know they're Raiders fans, absolutely, but completely respectful, welcoming. We walked all around the parking lot, the tailgate. Everybody was like, "Come on, have a beer." One of the best and most open fan bases I think I've been around on game day. So tremendous respect for Raiders fans.
They kind of remind me of like West Coast Bills fans. Like in that kind of like family atmosphere, which I know sounds so weird because I'm sure there's a bunch of other AFC West fans who are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, those people put us through the ringer. It's like, well, yeah, you're AFC West fans. Like, I'm wearing Chargers gear. I'm probably going to hear it in the comments. But when you go to a Raiders game as a neutral fan, or even just as a fan of a team that they're playing against, but it's not like a division rival. Like we were there in the Monday night opener, the first game that they allowed fans at Allegiant. It was packed with Baltimore fans, right? And like everybody's tailgating together in the parking lot. Everybody's having a great time.
Yeah, they let them hear about it, but we were sort of waiting. We're like, okay, where are the fights going to be? Where's all this aggression and acrimony? None. Zero. Couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, you just throw some folding tables and a little bit of lighter fluid in there, and it's going to look exactly like a Bills tailgate. It does remind me of that atmosphere, despite the reputation. Now, there are some stadiums around the NFL that I will not name where you wear the home team colors no matter what. If you value your personal safety, I would not say Vegas is one of those.
Not at all.
Now, that being said, as far as how they performed in Vegas last year, general theme of the episode, could have been worse. Could have been better. They're kind of dead ass in the middle of the NFL, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. I'm still trying to decide exactly how I feel about everything that happened in 2023, just because you're kind of grading on a curve when you start off with Josh McDaniels, and then, of course, they picked it up in the back half of the year. But overall, let's just say meh.
Middle for sure, and let's be clear, the middle in the NFL is a tough place to be stuck. If you're not bad enough to get ultra-high draft picks and turn your fortunes around that way, and you're not one of those teams that's perpetually good and just gets used to drafting in the late 20s or 30s, there is a wide middle of 10 to 12 teams every year that is stuck in territory where the Raiders were. So 2023 results, 8-9. That did put them second in the division. Home record, 6-3. Road record, 2-6. Not near as good away from Allegiant. Last 5 games, 3-2. Again, it is a tale of two teams. The start of the year and then AP taking over was a very different scene. Literally, the day after we saw scenes from the locker room, whole sea change in the course of under a week in a franchise. It's a very rare thing to see. We absolutely saw it. So sort of trying to push those two together and make them one evaluation is difficult, but we're going to try. 2 numbers we've got for you. The first one is called quarterback support. If you've been watching the series, you know what it is. If you've not, it's a stat that I came up with Arjun Menon, who now works for the Jets in an analytics capacity. It's 5 different statistics that really come together to shape the picture of how a team sets the table for its own success, how they basically provide their quarterback with support to win. It's a 0 to 100 scale. Worst team in the NFL, obviously a 0. Best team is 100. The Raiders were a very respectable 58.1. That put them 14th out of 32 teams.
Dead in the middle of the pack.
Top half, very close to dead middle, but top half. So you can think of that as how should they have done? About 14th. How did they do for us is covered by Power Score. We take 6 metrics from the team: rushing offense, passing offense, rush defense, pass defense, points scored and points allowed. We simply assign them their NFL rank. Where did they finish in the NFL compared to their peers? Were they 10th? Were they 20th? Of course, everybody wants to be first. Take those 6 numbers, add them up, divide by 6. We get a Power Score. So think of it as their average NFL rank for actually how they did in being a good football team. Raiders' Power Score was 16.2, and that put them 15th overall.
Dead in the middle of the pack.
So they set the table at the 14th best level. They performed at the 15th best level. Again, this is a team in the middle of the NFL, which is, again, not bad, not good, but can be a tough place to be. And it's almost sort of like the doldrums when you're sailing. It can be tough to get momentum to get out of there. Sometimes you have to get worse to get better. It is very difficult to take a team that is solidly in the middle year after year and elevate it into that top 10 status.
They kind of remind me of the Broncos, and I know that's a dirty word here for Raiders fans listening to this.
I was going to say, that's a pull.
But if you look at how 2023 went for Denver and how 2023 went for the Raiders, like they both started off just
bad,
horrible, right? And the Raiders kind of, made a late season surge under AP, just like the Broncos made a late season surge when they made all those changes on defense, both personnel wise and scheme wise, and Vance kind of saved their season. The Raiders did the same thing, except their magic potion was just getting Josh McDaniels the fuck out of the building. And so that's part of the reason why I think like maybe I'm a little bit harsh on them, just because McDaniels was so bad. like so bad as a culture builder, as a leader, as everything, right? And even like personnel decisions. We were talking about this morning before we even sat down to record. I saw Dylan Parham's listed as right guard now, which for me and for you, we're like, how did it take 3 years for that to happen? It's like, oh yeah, because Josh McDaniels. But like Parham was a right guard in college, and a damn good one, like an immovable wall in college. Never gave up anything. They tried to play him, Josh tried to play him at left guard his rookie year with the Raiders. He only had 2 games at right guard that entire rookie year, and he gave up an average of 1 pressure per game. The other 15 games at left guard, he gave up 57 pressures. And that wasn't their clue to just be like, oh yeah, he's a right guard. Like they kept trying to do it. Now that Josh is gone, they're letting Parham just be a right guard. They drafted JPJ to play left guard. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. It's like maybe I'm a little bit too harsh because McDaniels was wholly incompetent there. But at the same time, there's still some other holes in the roster where I'm like, I don't know. Like when you have that quarterback situation, like your best hope is Gardner Minshew. Like that's what really gives me a hard time with this team is I know there's good pieces and I know the coaching was so bad. And so they kind of had to fight through a lot of stuff internally just to be decent. Like I get that. I get that we're grading on a curve, but at the same time I look at the roster and I'm like, they're still probably a couple years away.
I think it's fair to say they're better than they were because of some subtractions and some additions. We're going to talk about the draft. We liked it, but they're not there yet. And that's the frustrating part. We get impatient and we're like, well, faster. Now that you've fixed the coaching, you need guys to execute that vision. And they're not quite there yet in some key positions. In other key positions, they have some of the best players in the NFL. Max Crosby, one of the best edges in the NFL, period.
Devontae, they picked up Wilkins. Like there's stuff here.
Yep.
And that's what's optimistic about the team is like there's units they can lean on to win games single-handedly for them. Like
yes.
their tight end duo, their young tight end duo is nuts.
One of the best in the league.
Right? But there's just enough holes where I'm like, they'll probably end up in the same spot for different reasons. They'll probably still end up mid-pack, but I'm going to feel really good about 2025 for them because I think this year is like the stepping stone year. It feels like Detroit a couple years ago or, the Niners early on in Shanahan's tenure where they got Jimmy and then they went on that run and they're like, okay, this is the stepping stone. And then all of a sudden we saw them in the Super Bowl a couple of years after that. And all this probably is a good segue into, jumping into the scheme talk and talking about some of these new coaches that we've alluded to and how they're going to try to, affect positive change here from the McDaniels era. Before I do get into that, what Luke Getsy, or at least what we think Luke Getsy is going to do before I get into Patrick Graham, I do want to thank Underdog for making the show possible in the first place. If you guys have been watching sports this summer, I think by the time this comes out, actually, we're going to be either at the start of training camp or right around the start of training camp. So football is back as of the air date for this. We're recording it on June 21st. So, it's been a while, but if you've been watching sports all summer, you've been watching baseball, you've been watching golf, maybe you were watching golf and hockey back when those were still in season, or maybe you've just been doing best ball drafts all summer to get ready for your fantasy season. Maybe you're doing season-long pick'ems. I would encourage you to check out Underdog because they offer literally all of that. So if you love watching sports, but more importantly, you love playing stuff while you watch sports, check that out at the QR code on the screen or at the link in the description below. Use promo code BOOTLEG and you'll get up to $250 in bonus cash and a pick'em special in the lobby. So whether you're doing best ball, whether you're doing pick'ems, I think season-long pick'ems, they've got Devontae Adams already up there. I don't know if they've figured out exactly if they want to do Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell, but maybe by the time this airs, I'll throw one of those on screen. So there's a bunch of options to play along, especially training camp time. With that, speaking of training camp, I want to talk about what we think Luke Getsy is going to be installing in Vegas to try to make this offense semi-watchable. Now, I wouldn't say that Luke Getsy is a specialist in making offenses watchable. He certainly didn't do a good job of that in Chicago, but I'm willing to give second chances. I'm willing to see what he might be able to do in Vegas. I won't lie to you and say I'm super optimistic, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Here's what we know about Luke Getsy. Lots of 12 personnel in Chicago. He was 10th in terms of usage of 12 personnel when he was the OC there last year. I would expect that's going to go up in Vegas.
It better.
Just because they have a good tight end group. And why only have one of them on the field at a time? Like, their second tight end is better than their third wide receiver, so they're going to be in 12 personnel.
By a bunch.
Here's the thing about Getsy. If you're just looking at surface stats, a lot of it made sense. A lot of it seemed like he knew what he was doing. Like, their run-pass distribution was solid, solid in the middle of the pack in terms of run calls versus pass calls. Play action number at 25% was good. Again, solid number. They called a bunch of RPOs. They had a healthy motion usage percentage at 52%. Like, they were kind of in the middle of a lot of tendency metrics, if you want to refer to it like that. Like how their offense operated. Like, how modern were they? Here's the thing, though. If you actually watched Bears games...
Yeah, I did a little bit.
Well, I know you, unfortunately, were burdened with that obligation to watch the Chicago Bears attempt to play offense. But for those of you who didn't, if you watched Bears games, they called a bunch of play action and RPOs, and they tried to lean on the run game, and they tried to make Justin Fields' job easier from that perspective. It wasn't that was the problem. It was the actual calls that were being made, right? It was the fact that their run game was so stale and boring. It's just like, let's see how many times we can run inside zone over and over and over again, but the same way over and over and over again. It wasn't like different flavors of inside zone like you'll see with, say, Arizona. It was, we're going to call split zone and then split zone again. We might call duo a couple times, be a little fancy here, and we'll go back to split zone. Like, it was very stale. It was very simplistic. If we're calling RPOs, it's not going to be a huge variety of RPOs. They had like 3 of them that they leaned on. The big thing was, if you get into third down, here comes a screen pass. Like, that was the big thing with Bears fans is you could set your watch to it. They get to third down, they're calling a screen. They threw the second most screens on third down in the entire NFL. Here's the thing. They only averaged 2.9 yards for every single one of those screens, whereas Miami, who was the only team that called it more, but they actually have a bunch of different screens. They call a huge variety of screens. They average 7 yards on those. So just calling something a lot doesn't mean they're actually designed well, doesn't mean that they're executed well, doesn't mean that there's a huge variety. So that's where kind of like the base stats with Getsy lie a little bit. On the surface, it looks like he's doing things that other modern offenses do, but the actual calls were just kind of shit.
Kind of reminds me of, you go to the grade school science fair and you see the kid that actually did all the work and put together a really cool project, and then there's a kid next to him that like checked all the boxes, had all the elements that he needed for a science project, and yes, they're all there, but they're kind of like, I don't know, clear tape together and it's leaking a little bit. And so it looks good on the surface. You're like, well, all the pieces are here, but they didn't really work out. So this is I'm really glad that you get to do this section for this particular team, because I don't want to talk about Luke Getsy's offense any more than I have to. But I am morbidly fascinated this year by Getsy in Las Vegas and Justin Fields in Pittsburgh, because now they're separate. And you couldn't really pull them apart last year. Was it execution of decent calls? Sometimes, again, the calls looked good. It looked like the Bears are on the right page, like they had the right thing called, and then the execution failed. Sometimes they didn't have the right thing called, and it got executed well, and it still got stuffed. So it was sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now they're separated, and you'll be able to tell a little bit more about what each can do, and maybe, effectively assign blame in reverse. It's just like rewatching tapes of a train wreck.
Well, it's one of those, like, okay, it's 2nd and 10, the first down run didn't work. They're calling a pass. That's what you should do. Like, he's halfway there, but you're calling all hitches on 2nd and 10. Like, I don't know.
It was not great. It was not easy to live through. The run game was bad enough that they took one of my favorite players in the entire draft, Roschon Johnson, and made him look well below average.
Dude, he made Darnell Mooney block an edge rusher. Like, that's the kind of shit we're talking about. It's like,
It's the kid with all the tape on his project.
Doesn't,
You're like, you got it all there, but it's not arranged correctly.
Yeah.
And that is the art of play calling. So we'll see if, because Getsy, of course, protested that he was much better than that and was being held back by offensive line issues, which is true. Quarterback execution, the inability of folks to just see his vision and do it right. That's a typical coach refrain. I don't love it, but that was his defense. We'll see. Like, he's got a different unit that I think will be disciplined in a different way. I think the offensive line is better than what he was working with last year. So again, his sort of base for success is slightly higher. The heights maybe not as high, but we're going to see whether or not he's got that knack, that execution, when to call the right thing. Because he calls, like you said, a lot of stuff that a lot of other people call at about the rates they call
He just calls it at the wrong time. Like every time. It's at the wrong time.
So we're going to see if he's improved that way as a play caller. I hope so for Raiders fans, because as a Bears fan, I do not have glowing recommendations for Mr. Getsy.
Yeah. We have our own problems with Shane Waldron, but the fact that we're still like, oh, thank Christ, Shane Waldron is calling plays. That tells you a lot. Again, I'm willing to give him a second shot. We'll see what happens. They certainly have talent on that offense. Like, if you have that tight end duo and you got Devontae Adams, you got Jacoby Myers, like, we like Bam, like, there's stuff there.
Yep.
So we'll see what he can do. As for the Raiders coordinator that we have no issues with whatsoever, who we know is very good at his job, Patrick Graham. He's a coordinator who in the past has thrown a lot of exotic things at people. He's had high blitz rates in the past. He's thrown a lot of sim pressures at people in the past. He's done a lot of funky stuff on the back end in terms of crazy rotations and everything in the past. That was not him in 2023. His Raiders defense just played everything super straight up, which I think was his way of just helping people play fast. Like, we're not going to do something super complicated. We're not going to try to stunt or blitz our way into pressure and then get caught with something. Like, if they have a perfect call against, a three-man game and all of a sudden the canyon opens, we give up an explosive play. He's like, no, we're going to play stuff straight up. We're going to trust our talent to execute. Sometimes they played extremely well, especially in the back half of the year. They played extremely well. And sometimes they just didn't quite have the horses to make that style work. But for the most part, I really like the job that he did. In terms of schematic tendencies, he's one of these DCs where we're going to present a too high picture pre-snap, and then we're just going to get into whatever we're running post-snap. Generally, it's going to be cover three, very heavy cover three team. Their changeup was just not rotating and just leaving their safeties high and playing quarters. So they're one of those teams where we're either here or we're here, and that's basically it, right?
Yeah, we might swap sides.
That's pretty. Yeah, it's either 3 weak or 3 strong. We're gonna play it straight. In terms of blitz rates, they had the 4th lowest blitz rate at only 20%, but they also had the 20th ranked stunt rate. So oftentimes, if you see teams that don't blitz a lot, they stunt a lot. The Raiders didn't do either of them a lot. They, again, just kind of played it straight up. Like, we're just going to rush. When you have Max Crosby, yeah, that's probably going to work. And it did, because Max is Max. He's amazing. Then you add in Wilkins. Like, again, they're just really good at their jobs. We're not going to screw with it. We're not going to try to scheme them up to get pressures. We're just going to let them do their thing. So I kind of expect that to continue this year. He was also only 21st in terms of calling simulated pressures, meaning, we're bringing nickels, we're bringing linebackers, still only rushing 4, but it's a different 4. They just rushed the defensive line. That was it. It was the most straight up defense in the NFL, other than probably Gus Bradley, ironically another former Raiders coordinator. But it doesn't mean, or I should say, lack of being exotic doesn't mean bad.
Correct.
It just means Graham thought being simple, having easy to understand and easy to execute assignments was his best path to success, or rather his best way to give his players a path to success. And there were games where that worked really well, like especially in the back half of the year. That approach worked really well. I'm curious to see if they keep that going this year, or maybe they kind of add in some extra things. Maybe adding in Wilkins will inspire him to do some funky things with his fronts. I don't know, but For the most part, this is one of those defenses where what you see is what you get, and what you get sometimes is pretty darn good.
Felt like that was a choice to be a steadying influence on a team that really needed steadiness. They needed stability. They'd had a lot of instability in the first half of the year. And I feel like Patrick Graham probably sat down with AP and said, I'm going to make this simple and fast and hard to screw up, right? There's not going to be a lot of finger pointing about, well, I thought you had. No, we've got straight rolls. We know what they are. We're not going to vary them that much. That gives an offense a certain advantage, but it also gives us an advantage of being able to play quickly and being very clear about our assignments. We know what we're doing. We're just going to pin our ears back and go do it and try and win with talent. And that felt like a reaction to the first half of the year of, we need to be a rock. We're going to have a lot of up and downs. We're going to have a lot of change. We already have. We're not going to make this leaky. We're not going to make this, like you said, a place where we can get caught and then we feel like we don't know what we're doing. We're going to do our thing. It's not going to be super complicated. We're going to do it as well as we can and, let the chips fall, for a Vegas analogy. Some days that's going to work, and it did. Defense played very well. And some days they're going to get us, but we're going to know where we stand on defense.
It turns it into a game of matchups. Because if you know what you're doing and they know what you're doing and everybody is very clear pre-snap, like, what's happening here?
This is mine. I got this.
It just becomes about matchups. Like, do your guys hold up or not? I still think, like, even after the draft, even after, the offseason, I still think they need help at corner so that if they need to, they can survive some of those matchups. But they're not completely bereft of talent. And, of course, if you're turning it into a matchup of go ahead, try to block our D-line, like, they're probably going to win that one. They got some linebackers that we really, really like. So the matchups are winnable for them in most areas. And I think when you're a DC that has dudes like that, you can just kind of get away with it of like, oh, we're going to turn it into me against you. Well, I've got Max. You've got not Max Crosby.
Right.
I win. Fuck you.
Yeah, I've got Wilkins, you've got not Wilkins. And so you keep adding those pieces. Of course, you can't have one at every defensive position, so you have to make it up somewhere. And we'll see if there's some adjustment with a full offseason of a unified coaching staff to say, okay, we've done our base level stuff, right? We've done our one-on-one stuff. We're solid in the fundamentals. Now we're going to start to add some wrinkles because we have a little bit more talent. We have a little bit more familiarity. People are a year further into the system. Now we can start to crank up the degree of difficulty a little bit and make it a little harder for offenses to know what's coming.
That's probably as good a segue as anything to talking about the rest of the coaching staff. I want to preface this also by saying I wasn't a real big fan of their GM hire. We're going to talk about the front office too. Before we even get into the assistant coaches, was Tom Telesco really their best option? Like, am I crazy for thinking that was probably like 10th or 11th on the list of names that I would have brought in, and they brought him in like almost immediately?
Yeah.
I feel like if you're a GM coming fresh off of taking Quentin Johnston ahead of Zay Flowers, that's probably not the call I would have made.
And a lot of other choices that didn't really add up. So we're talking about Tom Telesco, the GM of the Raiders, former GM of the Chargers, who played out his string here in LA and, was moved on from for a reason, which was the roster's not that good. If you watch the Chargers episode, we addressed that Harbaugh and Ortiz were starting from a position of the roster's not as good as everybody thinks it is. A lot of people think this is a, fully stocked roster. There were many people that spoke out last year and said, it's really not. Like, it has some high-end talent, but there are a lot of holes here. And that's what happens when a GM sort of misses over time. We talk about stacking good drafts all the time. The opposite is also true. If you miss on 3 drafts in a row, it's going to hurt.
And if you miss on free agent signings, like giving a bunch of money to J.C. Jackson.
The resume was not great. So I'm with you that the speed at which he got the job or with which he got the job, I was like, okay, that seems a higher degree of confidence than I would have in that hire. I don't know what the connections were. I don't know what pieces of him as a as a personnel executive or as a leader of that piece of the organization really spoke to them, or who it spoke to. Did it speak to the owner? Was AP really good with it? I'm not sure, but something clicked because it happened very, very quickly. And again, we both felt like that left some meat on the bone. We were like, there's other younger, not even younger, there are other more accomplished personnel folks out there that we would have tabbed first. And we're not talking about one or two.
Yeah, just like if you compare the hire of Telesco to, say, what we think Adam Peters is going to do in Washington, I would say Washington 100% nailed that hire. His first draft there, I think, is evidence of that. Like Adam Peters has been very sought after for a long time. And how excited we were about that hire, I think, is a mirror image of how confused we were about this one. I just think it's two totally different levels of candidate. How about that?
The reaction was certainly, well, that's a choice.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a choice we would have made. The head coach now, solidly, Antonio Pierce, we both believe in that hire very strongly, largely because of how the team reacted, both off the field and on the field. Off the field reactions from a team are nice. Players, coaches, if you want to call them that. But if the results don't come on the field after that change, kind of doesn't make any difference. The Raiders had some of both, so we're encouraged by that. They seem like they have their ship pointed in that direction very solidly, and that's great. The handshake between Telesco and Pierce, again, I don't know. I don't know why they chose Telesco so quickly. I would hope, because most successful organizations in the NFL have a very strong handshake between GM and head coach. So I would hope it's a good relationship and they understand what each other likes and needs, but I can't speak to that.
Well, I mean, their first pick together was Brock Bowers, so they at least started off on the right foot.
Yes, they did.
We'll give them credit for that. They didn't take the bait and trade up using multiple very, very high assets to go get JJ McCarthy at 4, like some people speculated they might. So kudos for just sitting there and taking a really good player and not,
Kudos for not doing a wildly bad thing. We'll see how it works out. Also have to mention that the assistant head coach here is Marvin Lewis, longtime Bengals head coach. So as AP starts to navigate his journey as a head coach, he can lean very heavily on Marvin Lewis, one of the most experienced head coaches in the NFL, and say, hey, how did you do this when you were early in your coaching career? And that is a very valuable asset for a young head coach to have. So that's a great addition to the staff. Offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, we talked about him. Defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, we talked about him. Special teams coordinator Tom McMahon. Now, as we get to offense, we've got this ubiquitous title in the NFL this year, Senior Offensive Assistant, which means I'm going to point you in whatever direction I need the most help. And again, AP's got some serious experience here. Joe Philbin, 38 years of coaching experience, was the head coach in Miami for 5 years, was most recently the OL coach at Ohio State.
He's known to be a very, very, very good developer of offensive line talent. He's coached offensive line for a long time. He's been responsible for a lot of not just college products working out in the NFL, but also taking young NFL players when he was coaching in the league and getting the most out of them. I'm not going to say he's on like the Callahan, Scarnecchia level, but he's known to be probably one of the 10 best offensive line coaches alive. So pretty damn good hire by them.
And yet another former head coach on staff that AP can lean on for multiple things. James Craig is the offensive line coach. First year is the man tasked with getting the offensive line in order. 26 years of coaching experience, 8 at the NFL level. Was the assistant OL coach for the Niners for the past 2 years. So that's where he comes from. Scott Turner is the pass game coordinator. Second season in the role for the Raiders. 12 years of NFL coaching experience, 3 as an OC in Washington. And yes, name sounds familiar because he is Norv Turner's son. Luke Steckel is the tight end coach. First season in the role with the Raiders. Now, when you are a position coach and you are handed the gifts that Luke Steckel has been handed, 2 very high picks at tight end, 2 very talented tight ends, you have a lot of pressure on you to develop those assets and make them pay off for the organization. They want to feel right about spending those assets on those players. That's going to fall on Luke Steckel. Was with the Titans for 10 years, 2 as a tight end coach. Helped Chigakonkwo as a rookie, one of our favorites, and then had a 1-year stop coaching assistant offensive line with Chicago. So you're talking about one of the most expensive tight end rooms in terms of draft capital, not in terms of contract value, in the entire league. One of the most high profile for sure. I can't think of a brighter light being shined on tight end anywhere than in Las Vegas. And that's on Luke Steckel. Edgar Bennett is the wide receiver coach, 32 years of NFL experience, of course, 8 as a player. And Carnell Cadillac Williams is the running back coach. Spent the last 5 years at Auburn. A lot of people thought that he should have got the Auburn head coaching job. His time at Auburn included stints as both the assistant and interim head coach. Wasn't given the head coaching job. Jumps to the NFL on the offensive side. On the defensive side, there's a hidden gem in this staff, or a hidden stat that I think is fascinating because AP has a type. So we'll start with Rob Ryan, who is the senior defensive assistant. Just like we have senior offensive assistants all over the league now, we have senior defensive assistants, which is just, hey, man, you've got a ton of experience. You've been in a lot of places. We're going to make you our closer, our fixer. So come to the staff and bring whatever you're going to bring, and we're just going to move you around and give you this sort of overarching title. That's Rob Ryan. Former players on the defensive staff, including, of course, Patrick Graham as the defensive coordinator, Gerald Alexander, Mike Caldwell, Andre Carter, Ricky Manning Jr. 3 of the 4 remaining assistant coaches on the defensive side of the staff that I haven't named here played linebacker in college.
So what you're saying is AP likes guys who are just like AP.
AP has a type, and it is him.
Yeah.
He likes linebackers. This staff is chock full of linebackers. The one guy who wasn't listed here and wasn't a linebacker was a cornerback running back in college. So
I would say linebacker coach, though, is a very common path to being a DC because that is the position group that has to be tied into everything.
That's right. Forward and backwards.
100%. Whether it's run defense, coverage, blitz packages, again, linebackers, the guys who wear the dot. They get the call, they get people lined up. So linebacker coaches are often the ones who become DCs. I would also say secondary coaches are typically the second most common, and followed by D-line coaches. But that's the position group that has to do everything. So if you have a staff full of linebacker coaches, they're going to be able to coach pretty much anything and be pretty good at it.
Yeah, and all these guys played linebacker. That's the thing. It's not just coached linebacker. They all played linebacker. It feels like probably the opening line in the defensive coaching staff interviews is, "So, did you play ball? Yeah? What were you?" Linebacker. Okay, cool. Let's keep talking. So I feel like
you're hired.
Guy goes like safety. Everybody's going to start squinting and be like, "Tell us more about this
We
safety."
don't like your type around here. What do you mean you weren't 245?
Right. With a neck roll.
Oh, man. All right. Well, given all that information, talk about the coaching staff, talking about the schemes, talking about the personnel groupings that we think they're going to lean on. That's a good transition to talking about the underdog top 3, which is, if you're not familiar with this segment, where we try to identify the best 3 values per team. We do this for every single team when it comes to fantasy football, because we all love our fantasy football. You would think that Devontae Adams would not be on this because we focus on values. Who are you getting at a discount? When's the last time Devontae Adams was ever at a discount?
It's
been a while, right? This year, though, you're actually getting him at a discount. I think it's for the first time in like probably 6 years.
Yeah.
Where you're getting him outside of the top 12 receivers. He's going as wide receiver 14 right now. And I think it's a product of, you look at the quarterback room with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, whoever happens to be the one. It's probably going to be Gardner, but people aren't enthusiastic about that, and neither are we, to be perfectly transparent. Like, we are not enthusiastic about this quarterback situation. But it's Devontae Adams. Like, what are we doing here?
And it's also Gardner Minshew, although we might not be like super enthusiastic about that in real football terms. Gardner will chuck it up.
he's definitely one of the guys who will be like, Devontae's down there somewhere.
He will give his receivers a chance. And early in Gardner Minshew's tenure, anywhere, everywhere he's been, receivers are like, oh, hell yeah, he'll throw it to me when I'm covered. I get to go win that thing. Like, he's not going to not look my way because he might throw an interception. No, that ball's coming. I've got a chance to make a reception. And early in Gardner Minshew's tenure, that tends to go pretty well. People are hyped about it. Then the turnovers tend to pile up. We didn't see them as much last year.
He sure tried.
But he will try. It is in his DNA.
He'll try to give the ball away.
He is not going to get conservative, folks. So Devontae is going to get his chances, and still, obviously, a good enough receiver to pay that off. You're going to see some production here, whether that adds up to wins, whether that positions the team well in the division. We're not talking about that in this segment. We're talking about fantasy football, and Gardner's going to put it up, and it's going to go Devontae's way a lot.
I know he's 31. I know the quarterback situation isn't ideal, but he's going to finish as top 10 receiver. I feel confident in saying that. So the fact that you're getting him outside the top 12, most people are in 8 to 12 man leagues, so you're getting him as a wide receiver 2, and he's going to be a wide receiver 1. That to me counts as a value. Beyond him, we have Zamir White going as RB23. This is a team that I think is going to run the ball a lot out of 12 personnel. Again, I can't speak to the quality of those run calls, but they're going to call it. Like, they're going to give him the ball and say, go ahead, kid, make me right. So at least White's going to get the opportunity. And when you're taking running backs, oftentimes what you're drafting is the quality of the offensive line. We think this is a quality offensive line.
Yep.
And you're also drafting the role. You're drafting the opportunity. So those two things work in White's favor. I would say he's going to outperform RB23 pretty significantly, if I had to guess. And then I want to talk about both the tight ends together. So maybe it's called Underdog Top 4. Fine. Michael Mayer is going as TE37 because most people are looking at him as the guy who's not going to be on the field at all because Brock Bowers is going to be on the field. Brock Bowers is going as TE10 already. I want to set the record straight. They're both going to be on the field together, and they also play entirely different roles. Michael Mayer is the Y. Brock Bowers is the move tight end. They're going to do different stuff. And if they go into 11 personnel, if it's early downs, well, I'll say this first. If it's late downs, if it's third down, Brock Bowers is going to be the tight end on the field in 11 personnel. If it's early downs, it's going to be Michael Mayer. So like these early down 11 personnel play action shots, they're going to go to Mayer. They're not going to go to Brock. So if you want to take Brock at tight end 10, fine, I get it. That's okay. He's wildly talented. We know that. Mayer shouldn't be going as TE37. I think both of these guys are going to be very productive for whoever happens to draft them. But I think the better value for what you're spending to get him is going to be Michael Mayer because people are just completely writing him off now that Bowers is in town, not realizing that Luke Getsy, if he could run 2 tight end sets every single play, he would.
And should.
And probably should. Yeah.
Here's the thing. Both of these tight ends, we've talked about all the draft capital that's been invested in them very recently, are more talented than wide receiver 3 on the Raiders, and they might be more talented than wide receiver 2 at this point.
I mean, the conversation between Bowers and Jacoby, like you could argue that Bowers is a better pure pass catcher. Like, I get it, and I love Jacoby. Like, Jacoby's a good player.
Right.
But Brock Bowers he's Brock Bowers. Like,
so there is no reason to take one of these tight ends off the field to replace them with Trey Turner as wide receiver 3.
God, no.
Like, you play Devontae, you play Jacoby, and you play both Myers and Bowers. So I think Mayer is a little bit underrated. I think he is definitely going to continue to be, I'm not going to say a focal point, but a strong point in this offense. He is not going to be forgotten or on the bench a whole lot. It's not the way I see it playing out. I think Bowers is amazing. He was one of my gems. I think 10's a little rich. Usually takes tight ends a little while to adapt. If anybody could do it more quickly, it would be Brock Bowers, but I'm not sure I want to bet on that since this is a value segment. So the value is Mayer. Both of these guys are going to play a lot, and they should. That's the best thing for the Raiders. It gives whoever's playing quarterback the most best targets on the field at the same time. It reminds me of kind of the offensive line. Like, give us our best 5. Like, that's your best 4 at pass catcher. Let's just put it that way.
It reminds me of the Boston TE party in the early 2010s. Again, we're talking about purely on-field comparison here, folks, where Gronk was like the classic Y tight end. Aaron Hernandez was the H-back, the big slot type. Like Brock Bowers, you're not putting him on the line of scrimmage to dig out a defensive end. That is not his game. He is not strong enough to do it. He played at 235, okay? He was 5 pounds heavier than Ben Skoranek. He's an H-back, but he's a damn good H-back.
No.
So they just do different stuff. And if Luke Getsy is going to make this offense work, it's because he's making it work through the tight ends. Oddly enough, not through Devontae. Now, Devontae is still going to eat because he's Devontae Adams. We know that. That's why we said it. But the overall success of the offense, and I would say the success of either Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell, will be because Getsy maximizes these tight ends. They are kind of it here. Like, they're going to be living in that personnel grouping. If these guys work, the offense will work.
I can't wait to see one particular formation from Getsy. Man, I hope he calls it. Both tight ends on the same side of the formation on Devontae's side.
Oh, like just going straight up 3x1, all your best dudes, like right next to each other.
Right. Pick them on defense, right? You're going to be short on one of them.
What that means is that Jacoby's getting the one-on-one backside because you're for damn sure putting 5 over 3 if all of them are right next to each other.
Right. And just run variations out of that setup. Like, it reminds me of McVay, right? Take a page out of McVay's book. Run one formation 100 different ways. And I can't wait until he pushes all those chips onto one side of the field and says, pick your poison. They're all real good. Who are you going to put that third defender on? Huh? You think your, coverage linebacker is better than Mayer?
Getsy's going to put them all on the same side of the field and then call a run, right?
Yes. I do know
because that's exactly what he does.
Let me dream, Coleman.
You say dream, I say nightmare. That's the Luke Getsy offense. Sorry. I know we said we wouldn't be super negative in this episode, but we're scarred by that.
Hard not to.
All right, let's get to some of the fun stuff. The personnel additions and losses here. We'll start with March. We'll start with free agency. They did say goodbye to some fairly significant pieces here, some very productive pieces for them. But overall, there was nothing in terms of their free agency losses that made me say, man, that's irreplaceable. They can't get that back.
Greg Van Roten moves on, right guard. Again, we've talked about the plan that the Raiders have to replace him. Again, I think it's an upgrade. I'm going to note him as significant because he did play 98% of the snaps last year for them. Hunter Renfrow, the slot receiver, no longer a Raider. Bilal Nichols is now a Cardinal. Played 53% of the snaps on that interior defensive line. Again, you're bringing in a Christian Wilkins. I think you know how you're going to replace most of those. Jermaine Illuminor, the right tackle, is now a Giant. Amik Robertson, the undersized but super feisty corner, is now a Lion. And man, I love that fit for the Lions. We'll talk about that when we get there. Josh Jacobs, running back, longtime Raider running back, is now a Packer, which feels so weird to me. And I don't love it, by the way, because I really love Josh Jacobs. And it's not going to be fun to try and stop him behind that Packer offensive line.
What was odd about that signing in Green Bay, by the way, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the NFC North, which is our last division in this series. So they signed Josh Jacobs, and everybody's like, oh, he's the bell cow, right? Because Aaron Jones then went to Minnesota. Then they immediately took Marshawn Lloyd, and I was like, oh, no. They didn't bring Josh Jacobs in to be the new Aaron Jones. They brought Josh Jacobs in to be the new A.J. Dillon. That's who he's replacing. But Marshawn Lloyd is the new Aaron Jones, and it was such like a whiplash type move where I was like, oh, no, that's a completely different move than I thought it was. Again, I still think Jacobs is going to play well there, but he's going to play an entirely different role than people thought he was.
Yeah, and let's be clear, Josh Jacobs is way better than A.J. Dillon. Austin Hooper, the tight end, is now with the Patriots. Jimmy Garoppolo moves on. He is backing up the Rams quarterbacking spot. And Jerry Tillery, interior defensive lineman, is now with the Vikings. Was 43, almost 44% of the snaps for them. Again, they got a pretty solid plan on how they're going to replace most and or all of those.
Well, it won't be hard to replace Jerry Tillery. That's for damn sure. In terms of who they retained in-house, John Jenkins, he's back. At the ripe old age of 35, still going after all this time. Yep. Him and John Hankins are both like just these grizzled old mid-30s nose tackles that are going to play forever.
Yep.
Jenkins is still going. Andre James, the center, they brought him back at a pretty healthy $8 million deal. Amir Abdullah, longtime special teamer, brought him back at less than $2 million per year. He's made his bones on special teams for a long time now, and he's going to continue to do that. In terms of third-party additions, this is where the majority of their big money went to. Christian Wilkins at the top, $27.5 million a year. This was ultimately them saying, we need interior pass rush help. We need interior defensive line help, period. We kept taking swings, not like high asset swings, but we kept taking swings trying to get diamonds in the rough. Couldn't do it. Let's throw money at the problem. We'll bring in a guy who's already good that we don't have to worry about. Christian Wilkins, Max Crosby, playing right next to each other. Hopefully Tyree comes along. He's kind of like being an inside-outside guy who's playing some on the edge, some on the inside. Let's have all these guys line up next to each other on third down. We'll just keep playing a simple, fast defense and just let the talent win. That was why they signed him.
Malcolm Kuntz erasure.
I love Kuntz. He's great. As a number 2 edge, he's actually one of the better number 2 edges in the entire AFC. It's kind of hard to find a reliable, steady number 2. You know who he reminds me of, actually, now that I think about it? Highsmith in Pittsburgh, right? Just a reliable, steady, productive number 2 edge who's not going to break the bank, but you can put him out there every single week and know that he's going to be a solid contributor. So, again, you have all 5 of these guys kind of rotating in together, except for Max. He never rotates because he's Max Crosby. That's a really, really good, solid pass rush rotation.
At the top, we talked about units on this team that the Raiders could lean on to win games. Circle this one in red. This is the one they are leaning on. They put all their literal and figurative chips in the bucket and said, we are going to create defensive line pressure. Oh, yes, we are. We're going to do Wilkins and Crosby and they are absolutely prioritizing this as a centerpiece of their team. And on paper, it looks scary.
Very scary. I would say the matchup between the Chargers offensive line and the Raiders defensive line is sneakily one of my favorite unit versus unit battles this year, because it's just killers all over the place on both sides. It's going to be awesome. They also spent $12.5 million on Gardner Minshew, obviously, who has plenty of warts in his own right, but if you want somebody who's going to stretch the field and give his receivers chances, that's Gardner. It was not Jimmy Garoppolo. To a degree, it was Aiden O'Connell, but I feel like Gardner is just a better version of what Aiden could be, right? I think if Aiden gets maxed out, he might just be Gardner Minshew, so just go get Gardner Minshew. That was probably the thought process behind it. Let's just skip that step and just go get that. Plus, $12.5 million for a quarterback who's going to be starting for you when other starting quarterbacks in the league cost $55 million. Economically speaking, yeah, that's okay.
This is the placeholder to get them to the place where they go get their quarterback of the future. They chose in the classic decision of how we build this team. We're going to build the roster, then we're going to get the quarterback. You need a quarterback in the meantime. It's Gardner Minshew for the Raiders.
Don't get me wrong. I don't like this quarterback situation.
Nope.
It's bottom tier in the AFC, and even when comparing it to the NFC, it's probably bottom tier there as well. This is not somebody who you really want to be your trigger man. But at the same time, they kind of didn't really have a choice.
You got to have one to play the game, and the options were really limited, and it was down to, they were just far enough outside the quarterback sweepstakes. Are you going to throw a bunch of assets in, push all those in now, move up, make a risky choice, or are you going to stick and pick, get talent, build the roster, go get who's available? Gardner Minshew was available. Get through this year, and then we'll take another look at it.
Yeah, I mean, 6 quarterbacks went in the top 12. Like they didn't have a shot at any of them. So It is what it is. They'll fix it in 2025. Cough, cough, Dak Prescott. Now they also brought in Michael Gallup. Speaking of the Cowboys, brought in Michael Gallup at less than $2 million. I think the injuries have really added up for him over the years, and he's just not the same as he was early in his career. But he'll be probably wide receiver 4 or 5 for them. Andrews Pete they brought in to add to their offensive line depth. If he's a starter, that's probably not ideal, but as a depth piece, I'm cool with it. Harrison Bryant, he's still kicking around at tight end. Brought him in at less than $4 million just to be their other tight end. Cody Whitehair also adding on to that interior offensive line. He's not going to start for them, or at least he shouldn't start for them, but as somebody who could play guard or center in a swing capacity, if you're only dressing 7 guys every single week, it helps to have one of those last 2 that aren't starters be able to play multiple spots. I think that's why they brought him in.
I would hope so. At this point in his career, very experienced, but has had trouble with reliability, and has struggled when he's been out there as a starter. Again, you could do a lot worse as a veteran backup with a lot of experience, a lot of starts under his belt. Obviously, you talked about versatility. I think the Raiders want him on the bench, but as a coach once said, depth players are depth players for a reason. When you put them out there, you realize why they're not the first string.
Overall, I would say it was a very successful free agency for them in terms of not losing anybody crucial, but bringing in at least one piece that absolutely is crucial. That's a positive for them. Moving on from March to April, the draft, this is where they really made most of their hay. I thought it was a really, really interesting class. They brought in, let's see, how many players do I think are going to be key contributors year one? 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially up to 5 key contributors in one rookie class. That's pretty impressive.
It's a solid draft. They start off with Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia, who I think is really, tight end is a misnomer for him. We talked about this through draft season. He is an offensive weapon. Get the ball in his hands, one of the most explosive yak threats in all of college, a dynamic and very difficult runner to bring down, just finds ways to make yards, incredibly gifted from a coordination standpoint, moves in a way that straight up tight ends just don't move for the most part. So lots of production, lots of different ways to win with him. Fascinated to see how they roll him into the offense. They get him at the 13th overall pick. Jackson Powers Johnson, or JPJ for short, the center from Oregon, who they're going to play at guard, comes in the 2nd round at 44th overall. Had there not been some injury concerns about him, I think he would have gone much higher. I think he could have gone as early as the middle of the 1st round if there were not those concerns about concussions and some lower leg injuries that he suffered through his last 2 years. But incredibly powerful, large human being who has the right mental makeup to play interior offensive line. He's just your picture of the guy that wants to go out there and kick the other guy's ass and laugh about it. That's JPJ.
Stylistically, again, I'm not saying personality-wise, but stylistically in terms of play, he reminds me a lot of Richie Incognito. He's kind of built like him too. Just this giant, square human being that doesn't go backwards. He's got one of the best anchors in this class. Like when you run into his chest, he doesn't move. And that was probably what attracted them to him so much was, okay, we got Gardner, who when he gets interior pressure, he tends to make pretty bad decisions when stuff is coming at him from up in the middle. So let's just draft a human wall in JPJ. We'll put Parham at right guard, where we know that he also is a human wall when he's playing on that side. We like our center. Like, that's a really good interior trio, which is what Gardner needs more than anything else, is a good interior trio. And also, okay, we got left tackle taken care of too. Right tackle is the one spot where I think there's going to be like a true competition for it. But like overall, like the talent here on offensive line, especially with Joe Philbin coaching them. This is a good unit.
And that interior trio is so important. And Getsy's going to have a ton of fun with JPJ, getting him out on the move, because even as a center, he could get to the second level and even the third and just demolish targets on the move. He is very gifted at that. So Delmar Glaze, the offensive tackle, speaking of offensive tackle, from Maryland in the third round at 77. Wasn't wild about this, but the tackle draft went in such a way that it didn't really surprise me, because there was an early run on a very talented tackle class. Therefore, the second phase or second run of tackles started earlier and got exhausted more quickly. And then you're into that sort of third tier of, these are the guys we think have a chance to start eventually. We're not going to be starting them this year, but even those guys' value was accelerated. It was supply and demand. The supply diminished really quickly, and if you wanted one, you just had to pay the price. I kind of feel like that's what the Raiders had to do here with Delmar Glaze.
They needed something.
Right.
Like anything. Like some kind of youth that they could develop at the position, right? And also somebody who could, maybe even push for that right tackle job. I don't know if he's going to win it, but if he's at least providing enough competition to push everybody else who's trying to win that job, Thayer Munford's probably going to win it. But, they needed some kind of, youth with upside in the room that they could start working on and developing, because let's say Colton goes down. Yep. Knock on, this isn't wood, but knock on whatever that's made of. If Colton goes down, they didn't have anybody else. They needed something in the room that they could remotely confidently throw out there and say, we think this might work. Glaze was one of the last stops on that train. If they didn't take it then, they weren't going to get anything, and they
Correct.
needed something.
No, I would agree with that. Deacamarion Richardson, the cornerback out of Mississippi State, 4th round, pick 112, gives them a lot of athletic potential out of the SEC, adds to that room. They've had, again, some cornerbacks move on. We talked about their pass defense last year. It's a really good landing spot for Richardson, because you've got that pass rush in front of you. You want to play as a secondary player there, because their quarterbacks are going to be chucking up some ugly ducks, and you've got the potential to pay that off.
You're going to be able to just jump everything, because how often are people really honestly going to get 3+ seconds against this defensive line? Not very often, right?
Not often.
So that first move you see from the receiver, if they start breaking down, you can trust that it's probably not a double move like that. Yeah, if it's an out route, it's an out route. There's no out and ups here. They don't have time to throw it. So drive on it, attack the ball, get picks. That's the benefit of having a defensive line like this, is you don't really see double moves against defenses that can rush the passer like this, because you're probably going to die if you call that.
Be aggressive, be physical. Richardson fits that profile, so I think it's a good match. Tommy Eichenberg, the linebacker from Ohio State, they get him in the 5th round at 148. I think he's a guy, again, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on this staff, because it's all linebackers. The entire staff is linebackers. They know what they want in a linebacker. If they saw that in Eichenberg, I was fine with it in the 5th round. This felt like appropriate value to me. It didn't feel like, oh my God, what's he still doing on the board? And it didn't feel like, oh, that's 2 rounds too early. What are you doing there?
He's an AP type linebacker.
I would
just
agree.
This human Coke machine, just flying downhill, great run defender. Not somebody who I really want to lean on in the pass game, I would say, to be kind. But if you just need a classic Mike linebacker who's going to show up, kick ass, stop the run, set up 3rd and 7s, and then he'll, it's all right, done my job. Send in the dime backer. That's Tommy Eichenberg.
Yeah, plays really well between the numbers, plays with really good angles, plays with a lot of violence, which you want from a middle linebacker. Seems like a fit, sort of top to bottom. Dylan Laube, the running back from New Hampshire, made a lot of waves early in the pre-draft process as a very wily pass-catching option out of the backfield. Feel like he gives them a changeup that can develop, might get some of those touches that used to go to the slot receiver in this system. Playing out of the backfield, they get him in the 6th round at 208. Trey Taylor, the safety from Air Force, in the 7th round at 223. All right, just gonna put this out there. This is a steal. This is an absolute steal.
Big Trey Taylor guy?
In the 7th round, abso-freaking-lutely.
I probably had a mid 7, if I'm recalling correctly, on him. So it's about right. I mean, maybe a little late, but it's about right.
You could have swapped him and Eichenberg, and I would have been just fine.
Damn, so you really like Trey Taylor.
I would have been fine with him in the late 5th.
Damn.
Totally fine with him in the late 5th. I think he is going to outperform this status. Not going to be hard to do. Again, he's a 7th-round pick. Liked a lot of the attributes he brought at Air Force. Very smart player, very physical player, coming down, filling the alley. Really, really like Trey Taylor and feel like they stole him at 223. And then the last player they got in the draft, 6 picks later, at 229 out of Pitt, the cornerback, MJ Devonshire, thought like he was a value too. I really felt like he could have gone at least a round and a half earlier. So kind of was up and down with that middle section for the Raiders, and then they came in with Taylor and Devonshire at the end, and I'm like, man, they're just cleaning up the table. Nice job.
Dylan Labe owns one of my favorite stats that I've seen in any sport over the last few years. Again, he is a running back at New Hampshire.
Yeah.
They played against Central Michigan last year.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, 295 receiving yards in one game.
Yep.
As a running back. And here's the kicker. His average yards per reception, it's not like he got 30 catches. His average yards per reception was 24.6. He did that on 12 catches.
Quarter of the field, every shot.
What the hell?
The tape's cool.
Dude, that's one of the greatest performances I've seen by any running back at the college level, I should say. FBS or FCS. Like, in my lifetime, that tape is wild.
Yeah, and playing above his level. Everybody talks about competition coming out of New Hampshire. Oh, who did he play against? Here's one of the spots where he played against competition at a higher level than his own team and wiped the field with them. Like, absolutely, you can't call that anything but like an epic difference-making performance. So that's why he got his invite to the Senior Bowl. That's why he was on people's radars, is because a smaller school player or a, not a traditional college powerhouse, New Hampshire, I think is a fair way to say it.
Wow. Shots fired at the New Hampshire Mafia. That's where Chip Kelly and Ryan Day got their start. How dare you?
And Chip Kelly and Ryan Day were running backs? Well, I'm talking about on the player side. Anyways, when he played against, competition that was, more highly recruited than him, absolutely just pantsed him. That put him on just about everybody's radar.
Overall, I think he's one of the 5 rookie Raiders that I think is going to be a key contributor this year. He's probably going to be their third down back if I had to guess, because
it's going to be just like that Central Michigan game. Not a high volume of touches, but he's going to do a lot with them.
High impact touches.
Yeah.
Again, Eichenberg, I think, is going to be a good role player for them as a rookie. Bowers and JPJ are going to be impact starters. And then potentially we could see Glaze out there too. So this rookie class, it started off really great. There's potential for the other guys to also pay off their draft status and then some as well. This has the, I'm going to use this word a lot today, potential to be a really, really good draft class for them. So I know I talked a lot of shit about Tom Telesco coming in, and he deserved all that shit. Like he messed the Chargers up badly, but at least early returns, I'm okay with it.
Solid start. I think it's fair to say, and it's not fair to grade a draft until 2 or 3 years into the league for sure. I think we're going to see a lot of contributions out of this draft class, at least at an NFL average level, if not slightly above that.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe this is the Telesco redemption arc.
It happens. GMs all have their ups and downs. Let's hope this is an up for Raiders fans.
In terms of notable undrafted free agents, the 2 that we honed in on were Andrew Coker, the tackle at a TCU, again, trying to add more depth to that room. I don't think he's going to make the final 53. He'll probably be on the practice squad, but we could see him being a practice squad call-up during the season. Might even get some snaps. We'll see. And then Lediatric Griffin, the wide receiver out of Mississippi State, I really like him. I actually thought he was going to get drafted. And to see him go UDFA, that was A, surprising. B, the fact that he went to the Raiders in that receiving room made me think, oh, he might actually make the team. Like, he could actually be their wide receiver 5 as a UDFA rookie.
Raiders like speedy wide receivers? What?
Shocker, I know. And then finally, Jaquan Shepard, the corner out of Maryland. I know you wanted to highlight him. I didn't get to him. Do you have a read on him?
Yeah, I got my first look at him when I was looking at his running partner at Maryland and kept saying, who's the other guy? Like, he's making a fair amount of play. He seemed solid. So, again, UDFA status doesn't surprise me. I'm not going to jump up and down here and say this is a tremendous value, but a guy that I think is sort of practice squad candidate, but has 53 potential, not necessarily this year. If he was on the 53 this year, I would be surprised. I would say that means he had a great camp and showed more than he did in his final season at Maryland. But there were enough flashes there when I was watching other members of that secondary, the safety, Bo Braid, the other corner. And I thought, well, Shepard, again, I had a PFA grade on him because it was like, well, or not even PFA, just a UDFA grade on him. But again, somebody you would want to bring into camp. The Raiders do. I'm interested to see how he develops. I don't think there's a ton of opportunity for him this year. But again, put him with a good secondary coach. Give him a year. I think we talk about this all the time. I think the bones are there, and we'll see how he develops now he's in the pros.
So after going through all of that, free agency, the draft, coaching staff changes, schematic analysis, talking about everything that went through last year to scratch and claw their way to 8 wins. How do we think they look this year? This is the summary portion where we answer 2 questions. The first being just flatly, did this team get better, worse, or roughly stay the same if we add up all their additions and subtractions and try to average it out? This one was one that I went back and forth on a lot because I did like the draft class.
Yep.
I did like the free agent signings. I did like a lot of the coaches they've brought in, to round out AP's staff. I like that they just got rid of McDaniels in the first place. That's already a plus compared to this time last year, right?
Correct.
But at the same time, some of the key hires they've made and key acquisitions they've made, I really do question. Like, I'm willing to give Luke Getsy a second chance, but it's not like I'm starting off on the right foot with him in terms of just watching how he calls an offense. I'm willing to give Telesco, again, another chance to prove that he can build a good roster, but he's coming off of a roster that he built out here in LA that was not good. And not only was it not good, but it was also expensive. Like, they were in cap hell and not good. So he's not really starting off with a good first impression for me as well. And then, of course, Gardner Minshew, I get it. They didn't really have a choice. They kind of had to do it. But it's not like I really believe in Gardner Minshew as like an actual long-term starting quarterback for them anyway. I don't even think Raiders fans believe in that. So if we're looking at offensive coordinator, GM, and quarterback, where our best possible reaction is, okay, I think that balances out all of the good, which is why I'm going with thumbs even. It's not bad. It's not up. It's just there. Is that the nicest way to put that?
It might not be the nicest way to put that, but I think it's an honest way to put it, and I agree with most of your points there. I'm also going with thumbs even. I can't get myself around a couple of things. One, the quarterback situation. Look at teams without a quarterback. Where are they going to go? They're going to end up somewhere in the middle again. The chances that they make the final 8 in the NFL without a quarterback, without a top-tier quarterback?
Almost nothing.
Almost nothing. If you go back and look at the final 8 for the last, 3 years, 5 years, teams without a quarterback just don't end up there. They just don't. Cinderella runs rarely happen that way. So that, I think, sort of puts them behind the 8 ball starting off. Now, they have increased a bunch of the talent on this roster. And like we said at the top, we do both think they're heading in the right direction. They've made some very nice changes. GM is kind of wait and see. Offensive coordinator is definitely wait and see for us. Did the running back room get better? It's tough to say that with Josh Jacobs heading out of town. Did the wide receiver room get better? It's the same as it was last year for the most part. Now, pass catchers, tight end room got better. Offensive line got better. Obviously, defensive line got better with the addition of Christian Wilkins. Did the secondary get better? Well, they had some turnover. Don't know if they're better yet. So there's just enough to say this is a maintain team, that is going to be different, but somewhat the same. The results are going to be about the same, a little bit better. It's going to feel a whole lot better, both to the players in the locker room and hopefully to the fans in the stands. But in terms of this year, yeah, we're really looking towards what are you going to do next year about another good draft class, hopefully adding your quarterback of the future and really sort of putting your stake in the ground and saying, this is the direction we want to go in on offense and into the future.
And that's the whole thing, right? Like when we say they're moving in the right direction, we're really saying from like a macro perspective.
Right.
Like, over the course of multiple years, we think they're going in the right direction because their philosophy is let's build the trench talent.
Yes.
Let's just not go backwards in AP's first year. Let's not get worse. I don't think they got worse.
Nope.
Let's just stabilize this thing. We'll win the line of scrimmage, and we're going to build a foundation through our line of scrimmage talent to be a good destination for whatever quarterback we bring in next year. And like next year's the big jump, right? So I know it sounds very contradictory. This episode sounds very contradictory because the Raiders themselves are just a contradictory franchise. Like we can like a lot of things about it and not like a lot of things about it and think that they're thumbs even, but also think they're going in the right direction. And we think that they have a good future, but also, God, I don't know about the GM and the OC and the court. Like there's a lot of things that sound like they go against each other, but that's just what teams in this range are. There's good, there's bad, it all evens out in the wash. The goal is just don't get worse, don't go backwards, and establish a foundation to build on for 2025. I think next year is the year where we really see a leap if they nail quarterback. It's a big if, but if they nail quarterback, because they're so good on the defensive line, because they're so good on the offensive line, because they have, a bunch of skill position talent that we really, really like. Like they have a shot to be that foundation. But for this year, when looking at ceiling and floor in wins, I have them dead ass in the middle of the pack again. My ceiling is 9 and my floor is 5. Which I know a lot of Raiders fans are like, how could you possibly put our floor at 5? We went through McDaniels for half the year last year and still ended up at 8. You're correct. That's fair. But if Luke Getsy is still Luke Getsy and Gardner Minshew is still Gardner Minshew, it almost doesn't matter how good you are in a lot of other areas of the team. Like, yeah, you're still going to have a good offensive line. You're going to be able to run the ball. You're going to be able to stop the run. You're going to be able to rush the passer. If you have bad quarterback play and bad play calling, that can undo a lot of good. And so there's potential that this could go sideways into like a 5-win season. But if it doesn't, if those guys are just average, their line of scrimmage talent can carry them to 9 wins, maybe challenging for a 7 seed. We'll see. Like they could be in the mix in December and kind of, again, establishing that foundation, that stepping stone for a potential big jump in 2025.
My ceiling's 10. And that is if everything goes right. And
if it's really right.
Right. If Patrick Graham, as we said, adds new wrinkles, adds the 201 stuff, and he's got more dudes, which he clearly does. They brought in Christian Wilkins. Like, if that defensive line is as terrifying as we think, and they're wrecking offenses, and Getsy's play calling truly was better than what showed out last year, really was subbed out by poor offensive line play last year, and that was the difference. We've talked about how they've, established a core on the inside of this line, how they have coaches that know what they're doing with offensive line development. If they give Gardner Minshew a stable platform to throw from, really leverage the tight ends, balance the offense, score enough points, and that defense is terrifying because of the defensive line, this could be a sneaky 10-win team. Do I think that's the most likely outcome? I do not.
Yeah.
I think 8 or 9, again, is probably the most likely outcome. My floor is 6 because they're not going to have to deal with McDaniels. They are starting with a full offseason under a unified coaching staff. They have improved a lot of the talent. Gardner Minshew is going to win a bunch of games. He just does. Is he going to win all of them? No. Is he going to win all the ones he should? No. But is he going to win a bunch?
He'll definitely win a couple that he shouldn't.
Exactly. So, again, it's going to even out. I know it sounds like, oh, they're really positive. How can they say, again, this is floor. If it doesn't work well, I still think they win 6 games. They play really well at Allegiant. They have great fan support. We talked about that. Gardner Minshew's really experienced. One of the more experienced second-tier quarterbacks in the entire league at this point. He's got a ton of starts. They're not going to be terrible. They might not be great. They could be sub 500, but they're not going to be terrible. So again, they're going to be in the middle. And that's just where we see the Raiders this year. We see the path forward to being better than that next year. A lot of it hinges on getting a quarterback and having that work. But this year, the best case scenario is Patrick Graham and that defense just beat the hell out of people and they don't score a lot of points. So Gardner Minshew doesn't have to chuck it up. They can maybe protect a couple of leads in a few games. That would be ideal. If that happens, could be a really fun season. More likely, this is going to be an 8 or 9 win team that's looking for a quarterback and the next draft to step up next year.
This is the hard part about being in the middle of the NFL.
Correct.
Like perpetually, right? It's the twilight zone.
Yep.
You see so many teams not get to the upper echelon until after they've been really, really bad.
Correct.
For like a long time because they get a bunch of cap space because they keep missing on draft picks. So they're never extending anybody. So they have a bunch of money. So they can combine that with like multiple, top 5, top 10 picks in a row. If those all hit and you're spending that money, all of a sudden, like, boom, you go from bottom tier team to top tier team quickly. Look at Houston, right? You hit on a couple high picks and have money to spend. You go from being one of the laughing stocks of the entire NFL, and also you hit on the coach, right? They hit on D'Amico.
Coach is a big part of that.
Important.
Yep.
But you go from being one of the laughing stocks of the NFL, you have the second overall pick, to being a AFC championship contender in like 18 months. The Raiders are one of those teams where they're perpetually in the middle. You're not picking high enough to get a CJ Stroud. You're not picking high enough to get a Trevor Lawrence, a Joe Burrow. And they hit on some players, and so they've got some big contracts. They don't have the same amount of money year after year to kind of do the spending sprees that some other teams do to make that leap into the top tier. They're just in the middle. That is the hardest place to jump from. And you have to have some kind of element of luck to do it.
Yep.
And they're gonna need to get lucky to do it, but they are perpetually facing that obstacle of being not bad enough to get good.
You know who it reminds me of?
Who?
Gardner's former team.
The Colts?
The Colts.
100%.
Before the Anthony Richardson pick, right? 3 years, they were like, well, we're pretty good, but we're not going to have a high enough pick for quarterback, so we're going to bring in veteran hope at quarterback for 3 different years running. And finally, they were like, nope, we're biting the bullet. We're doing it. We're picking a quarterback. We hope it works out. It looks like it's going to for them.
Well, they finally got bad enough to get good. That was the key.
Exactly. Raiders are going to have a similar path. They're either going to have to package up a bunch of picks and say, this is the guy we really want to lead our franchise, because, again, they're not going to be bad enough to get that high pick to just get him naturally. It's either going to be that, or they're going to go a couple of years with this strategy, say it's not working, blow it up a little bit, be bad enough, get a high pick, and start that way.
I know Raiders fans are like, you're preaching to the choir at this point, because they've been so annoyed about this for so long.
That's another thing I love about Raiders fans. Really smart football folks.
One of my favorite fan bases to engage with, because
in terms of football mechanics and football knowledge, really, really smart, well-schooled fan base. Kudos to you, Raider Nation. Yeah, one of the best.
And they tend to be like realistic too. Like, this is not one of the fan bases that's going to be like, how dare you not say we're going to win 11 games? Like, they know what they are. Like, they know it's a process. They know they're in the middle of that process. So, yeah, I don't know. I like Raiders fans a lot.
Yep.
I've never really understood the reputation. That being said, I live in LA. You guys know I live in LA. Remember, I said nice things about you, so please be kind.
Please be kind.
All right. Well, if you want to buy some Raiders gear, or you want to buy bootleg gear, or you want to buy gear for any other NFL team, you can do so at our clothing partner Homage. You can directly support your team while indirectly supporting our team, because anything you get at that link, we get a cut of it. So thank you if you happen to be buying Raiders gear from them. They have a whole bunch of Raiders gear, actually.
For sure.
Pages and pages and pages of it. So go check that out. I think they actually still have the starter jacket.
They may.
That really, really sleek one.
Again, we're recording this in June. You're probably not going to see it until training camp is well underway. They might, but if they do, grab it. It's classic.
Also want to thank our patrons who directly support us as well, including our executive producer tier, who've been ride or die with us for a very long time. Appreciate all of you once again. We are not done with the AFC West, by the way. So if you're just watching this episode as a Raiders fan, you've never seen this before, make sure to watch all the other AFC West episodes, catch up on all your division rivals, see what they've been up to, and then come back next week because we're talking NFC West, another fascinating, very talented, very hotly contested division. Dynamic division. How about that? Thank you all for watching or consuming this wherever you happen to do it, whether it's YouTube or through podcast. We will see you all again tomorrow.